Today guys, I'm going to be showing you everything that you need to know about the brand new Advanced Storm Controller and the Advanced Storm Beacon devices in Fortnite Creative. So first off guys, there's really two different ways that you can use the brand new Advanced Storm Controller device. You can set it up for mini BR modes where the storm moves completely randomly, or you can choose to completely lock down the entire storm phases so that the storm will always move in the same set path, and this is really useful for creating Zone Wars maps. You can also make completely random Zone Wars maps, but this seems to be a bit more temperamental and will require a few more settings to actually set up. So first of all, let me walk you through all of the different options on this device. So the first option in this is storm phases. You really only have two options. You can leave it at default or you can set it to custom. So by leaving this setting on default, it's just going to copy the exact same settings for the storm phases from the Battle Royale mode. This is super useful if you just want to create custom BR modes. You can just drop this down, leave it on default, maybe change the phase 1 radius, and that's about all that you need to do. I found that for most of the different islands in Fortnite Creative, 200 meters for the first radius setting tends to work the best. Again, the delay time is a pretty self-explanatory setting. By setting this to a minute, when you first load into the game and the game starts, you will have exactly 1 minute until the storm actually appears within the game. The next setting is the starting phase options. This is really useful if you want to create Zone Wars. If you want to create Zone Wars, then you can set the starting phase to something like 5. This allows you to skip the early stages of the storm and get straight to those moving storm zones. And the last option on the controller is the late phases move. By having this setting turned on, then the last 5 phases of the storm are able to move outside of the last circle. This is super useful for creating Zone Wars and authentic BR experiences. If you want to create it so that it's like the old style Battle Royale where the circle would just continue to shrink within the existing circle, then you can turn this setting off. The Advanced Storm Beacon has more options than the Storm Controller, but it's still pretty simple to understand. So the first option is to set the phase that this beacon will control. So right now this beacon is set to phase 1. This means that any of the settings that I choose to override here will only apply to the first phase of the storm. The first option that you can really customize is the end radius. This really allows you to dial in exactly what end radius you want to apply to each of your phases. I found a really cool trick to make sure that the storm completely closes in the 9th phase. This can be done by setting phase 8 to 5 meters. And then setting phase 9 to don't override. What will happen is it'll look for the end radius on phase 8, which is 5 meters, and it just happens to be the smallest setting that you can actually enable, so that when it goes to phase 9, it has to shrink it down from the smallest setting, but there is no smaller setting. So basically it causes the last zone to completely shrink up, just like it does in the real BR experience. The next setting is the wait time. This is basically how long you want the storm to remain static between phases, and how long you want it to wait before activating the next phase. So in BR, it might take a couple minutes for the zone to resize, and then it'll stay the same size for about a minute depending on what phase of the storm you're in. By setting the wait time, we're able to replicate this effect from BR, but in Creative. The next setting is pretty self-explanatory. It's basically how long it takes to go from the previous circle size to the new circle size. The smallest setting that you can have is 30 seconds, but you can increase this all the way up to 10 minutes. If you want to create the most realistic Battle Royale experience, then I actually recommend looking up the Fortnite Storm on Wikipedia. Someone has compiled a table of all of the different settings that you need to create different phases from Battle Royale. It includes things like the wait time, the resize time, and the damage settings that you need to set up. So if you really want to create the most authentic Battle Royale experience, then I will recommend actually looking up that table on Wikipedia. The next setting that you can set up is the amount of damage that the storm will tick for in the different phases. As you know, in Battle Royale, as the storm progresses into the later phases, the amount of damage that it deals actually increases. So to get that effect, you can start off low in phases 1 and 2 by setting it to about 1% damage. But as soon as you get to about phase 6, 7, 8, and 9, then you can actually turn this all the way up to 10% damage. The next setting that you can change is the movement behavior. Basically, there's 3 settings that you can choose from. The first one is move randomly. This basically allows the storm to choose where it wants to go next, and there's really no control over it, and every time you load into the game, the storm will move in a different way to the last time you played the game. This is really great for creating Battle Royale experiences and Zone Wars, but it does require a few more different settings to actually control this random movement to ensure that it doesn't go outside of the island. The next setting that you can enable is the move to beacon. This is great for creating fixed path Zone Wars. So if you want to create a zone wars that moves back and forth or left and right, anytime that you want the storm to follow a predetermined path, you're going to want to set this to move to the beacon. And the last setting that you can choose is none. This basically means that the storm won't move depending on the different phases that you set. It will just remain in the same location as the last storm circle. The last two options that you can choose from are linked together. They're the most useful when you have the movement behavior set as random. They basically allow you to set the minimum distance that the storm will move to and the maximum distance that the storm will move to. You can mess around with these based on what size of an island that you have. I typically recommend not going above 40 meters when you have it set to random. That's because when you have it set above 40 meters, there's a chance that when it selects the location of the next zone, if it's above 40 meters, it will choose a zone position that's actually outside of the creative island, and it will actually make the game impossible to win. I've actually found that these settings tend to work the best, but you can change these settings depending on whether or not you want to go for a zone wars or whether or not you want to create a BR experience. So that was a really in-depth rundown of all of the different settings that you can enable on both the Advanced Storm Controller device and the Advanced Storm Beacon device. Now I'm going to show you how to create a fixed path zone wars map, and then after that I'm going to show you how to create a zone wars map that will move randomly. So to create a fixed path zone wars map, we're going to set this setting to custom. I'm going to set the first zone radius to 100 meters. So by setting this to 100 meters, we create this really closed in tight environment which encourages a lot of chaotic building and is really perfect for zone wars. You can also set a delay time. I've set mine to none because I don't really need one. I'm going to leave the starting phase as number 1, and I'm going to allow the late phases to move. They're all the settings that we're going to need to create a fixed storm right now, so I'm just going to click accept. So for my fixed zone wars, I'm going to create 6 different phases. To be able to do this, we're going to need to create 6 storm beacons. We're going to place these beacons at different points around the map, which will act as the center of each of the different zones. I'm going to create a 6-phase zone, so I'm going to go around placing 6 different storm beacons around the map. Each of these different storm beacons will act as the center for the next circle, so this way the zone will always move to these beacons, and it will always follow the exact same fixed path. So I've created a simple 6-point zone. Basically it starts at the first one with a large circle, and then it's going to move over to point 2, before moving over to point 3, over to point 4, down to point 5, and then over to point 6. By setting up the beacons in this way, we're going to create a storm that actually follows this exact path every single time that we start the game. So to create the most realistic storm wars, I'm actually going to use a table that I found on Wikipedia, which lists down all of the settings for the real Battle Royale storm. So first of all, I'm going to set the wait time to about a minute. I'm then also going to set the resize time to a minute. I'm going to set the amount of damage that it does to 7%. I'm going to set the movement behavior to move to beacon. This is because we want to create a fixed zone wars, so we want the storm to always move to the next beacon and not to choose a position randomly. And we're going to leave the last 2 settings completely blank, because the distance from one beacon to the next beacon is always fixed, so we don't actually need to fence in any random movement with a minimum distance and a maximum distance. The next thing that we're going to do is actually set up the phase 2 settings. So I'm just going to move down this table that I found on Wikipedia again, and I'm just going to keep making the end radius smaller each time. So the first zone was 100 meters, so the second phase will now be 1 less, which is 75 meters. I'm also going to set the wait time to 30 seconds, and the resize time to about a minute. I'm also going to increase the damage to 10%, and I'm going to set the movement behavior to move to beacon. I'm actually going to change the end radius to 50 meters for the second phase. This sort of just encourages the zone to shrink faster. So I'm going to set up the third phase. I'm going to set the end radius to even smaller than last time. I'm going to set the third phase end radius to 30 meters. There's going to be very little wait time. In Battle Royale, there's actually 0 wait time. Unfortunately, this isn't a setting that you can set up in creative at the moment, so I'm just going to choose the smallest wait time, which is 5 seconds. I'm also going to set the resize time to a minute and the damage setting to 10%. I'm also going to make sure that the movement behavior is set to the move to beacon option, and we don't need to change the last 2 settings again. So moving on to the 4th beacon, we're basically just going to continue the exact same thing. We're going to make this zone even smaller than last time. I'm going to set this to 10 meters. I'm going to set the wait time of 5 seconds. I'm going to set the resize time to a minute, and I'm going to set the damage to 10%. Also going to make sure that this is set to move to beacon again, and we can move on to the 5th zone. So for the 5th zone, it's pretty similar again. We're just going to keep reducing this because I want this storm to completely shrink up at the end of the game. This means that on phase 5, I need to set my end radius to the smallest setting available, which is 5 meters. That means that when I set my 6th phase zone to don't override, it will try to shrink down from the 5 meter setting to a smaller setting, but there is no smaller setting, so it will basically cause the storm to completely shrink up and basically replicate how it is in Battle Royale. I'm also going to set the wait time to 5 seconds. the resize time to a minute, and the damage to 10%. Again, we're just going to make sure that this moves to the beacon to continue with that fixed path Zone Wars. The last beacon that we're going to set up is number 6. I'm going to set the end radius to don't override. That's to make sure that the zone actually completely shrinks up at the end of the game. I'm going to set the wait time to 5 seconds. I'm going to set the resize time to a minute, set the damage to 10%, and I'm going to set the movement behavior to move to beacon. And that's going to be all of the different settings that you're going to need, guys. When you have it all set up, you can see around each of the beacons is a purple circle that basically draws how big the end radius for each of the zones is going to be, and you could sort of use this to get a rough idea of how this Zone Wars is going to play. So right now I can see that this zone is looking a little bit too small for the phase that it's on, so all I'm going to do is increase this to about 20 meters. These circles are really useful, so you can actually see that this second zone is only overlapping slightly with the first zone. So what we can do is we can pick this up and actually move it further out. This actually encourages people to move a lot more, which we want in Zone Wars. The great thing about these different purple circles is it allows you to find the best configuration for your beacons. You can mess around with the position of the beacons to get whatever fixed path to Zone Wars that you want. So right now you can see that the first circle will start in the middle. It's pretty big and it'll shrink down to phase 2, which will then move up back north into phase 3, and then it'll move across to phase 4, continuing to get smaller. It will then shrink down a lot to phase 5 before completely shrinking up in phase 6. So guys, that's basically how to create a fixed path Zone Wars. What we're going to do now is actually going to change this up into a randomly moving Zone Wars, which I personally find a lot better because when you load up the game, you don't really know where the zone's going to go, and it just really provides a more authentic practice experience. So the biggest difference between a fixed path Zone Wars and a randomly moving Zone Wars is that you don't actually need your beacons to be placed where you want the phases to go. This is because the phases are chosen randomly each time, so it's just easier to keep all of the beacons and devices together, and that way it's just easier to manage the different storm phases. So to go about changing this from a fixed path Zone Wars to randomly moving Zone Wars, we're just going to change a few settings in each of these devices. We don't actually need to change anything from the advanced storm controller. All that we're going to be doing is changing the beacon device settings. So we're going to start off with the first phase. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to change this setting here to move randomly, and then we're going to use the last two settings at the bottom to sort of fence in how far this storm can actually move from phase to phase. If you don't set up any of these maximum move distances, then what will happen is it will choose a new storm circle that's actually outside of your creative island. That means that when you're actually trying to move to the next zone, you won't be able to because the storm circle is actually outside of the island. So what I found is I like to set the minimum move distance to 10 meters, and I also like to set the maximum move distance to no more than 40 meters. If you set this any higher, you run the risk of actually having the storm circle actually pick a zone that's outside of the map or outside of the island, which will cause the game to break and cause the game to end early. If you want to create a Zone Wars that forces people to move a lot more, you can increase this minimum move distance, which will actually force the zone to move a lot more than when it was set on 10 meters. However, I don't really mind it just being set to 10 meters. And we're just going to go around setting all of these different storm phases to move randomly, the minimum move distance to 10 meters, and the maximum move distance to 40 meters. So once you've finished setting up all of those things, you can see that all of the storm beacon purple circles have disappeared. That's because the setting has been changed to move randomly. And when we start the game, you can see the storm has chosen a random location at the start of the game, and you can also see that the next phase is going to move to a completely different location. If we were to start another game, the positioning and the path that the storm takes will be completely different than this game. So guys, that's basically how you create a fixed path Zone Wars and a randomly moving Zone Wars. If you want to extend this to create your own miniature battle royale experience, all you need to do is create a 9-phase storm. To do this, you just increase the number of beacons that you have to 9, and you should be good to go. You can find that battle royale storm table that I found on the game's Wikipedia page to create the most realistic Storm Wars and battle royale experiences. To create a randomly moving battle royale experience, you just need to extend the number of beacons that we have here to 9. If you want to create a fixed path battle royale system, then you just need to follow the same steps that were in the first half of this video. You just need to add an extra 3 phases. But that's going to do it for today's episode, guys. If you did enjoy it, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.